Welcome to another episode of Tomes and Tunes. This is the 61st episode, and I am your host, Arielle Silver. I am coming to you from Los Angeles, where I am a performing songwriter, and also I teach creativity and yoga. And I teach creativity, that is true, but I also teach creative writing, is what I meant to say. And 61 episodes ago, I was just sitting here in my little she shed in my backyard, wishing that I could connect with other songwriters. And the show just naturally, organically arose out of that very quiet time that we were all experiencing about a year and a half ago. And it's still going. So now as the world is opening up, it's the show of the past 61 episodes. It's sort of become a little bit of a, I don't know, like a collage or some kind of mosaic of what it's been like during this time for songwriters, as we have navigated the venues closing down and the quietude of the past 15, 16 months. And now as things are starting to emerge as well. And who knows, whatever we talk about, but a lot of times it has to do with creative process and songwriting. And of course, Tomes and Tunes, we talk about books. Anyway, my guest this week is Ben Grace, and like a lot of my guests on the show, I have not met Ben in 3 dimensions. We met over this time of COVID and just started bumping into each other in some songwriter groups behind the scenes, and I invited him onto the show. I'm really happy to bring him on today. I just adore his music, so it's a real joy. Before we get started, I want to let you know that on Sunday this weekend, July 25th, if you are in the Los Angeles area, I am going to be participating in a Pearl Jam celebration event at Hotel Cafe. And this is something that happens, I'm not sure how frequently it happens. It hasn't happened now, though, for a year and a half. It's called the Sunday Night Review, and it's run by Arthur Autumn, and it's sponsored by Honer, and they're going to be giving what are they called? Harmonicas, not microphones. Harmonicas away to the first 20 people who are in the door, and all of the artists who are all Los Angeles-based songwriters and singers and performers, we're all going to be playing Pearl Jam songs and interpreting them in our own way. It's a celebration of the band and the work that they have done in the world. So if you are around in Los Angeles, July 25th on Sunday, join me there. And then I'm also playing a full set of my own music on August 7th at Hotel Cafe. So I hope to see you there. You can find always my tour links and all that stuff at the linktr.ee/Arielle. That's swinging down there at the very bottom of the screen. Well, that's what I want to say. I hope that you're doing well. I hope that you are navigating this time with grace and, thought and mindfulness and all that stuff. And I'm going to bring Ben Grace on, and we'll hear how he has been doing as well. Hey, Ben.
Hey.
How are you?
Thanks for having me on.
I'm so happy to have you here. I feel like your music is one of my favorite finds over the past year. It's been a quiet year and a time when we can really just, I don't know, I guess sit in our little she sheds or whatever that room is that you're sitting in and listen to music. And I've just really enjoyed the work that you do in the world. So I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you. That's amazing of you to say. Definitely the people who we intersected with, I found great people in that group, and many of which I can't wait to actually meet in person. So
I know, me too.
We're practically neighbors. I'm in San Diego, so it's not far away, and I absolutely adore Hotel Cafe. I've only been there once pre-pandemic, but I feel like it's the community I was part of in New York City when I lived there for 7 years was Rockwood Music Hall was kind of the center of that. And I feel like Hotel Cafe is the Rockwood of the West.
The Rockwood of the West.
The people who play at Rockwood often play at Hotel Cafe and vice versa. So it's a great community of people out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I haven't played Rockwood actually because even though I lived in Boston for a long time, I got down to New York, but I somehow did. I don't know when that club actually rose up in the world, or like when, I don't know. It came into my consciousness later after I was, I told you I quit music. I stopped playing
Yeah.
for about 10 years, and I feel like it entered my consciousness during that time. I was like, oh, when did that show up? So, the Rockwood of the West, though, I think that having not been to Rockwood, I think that you're probably right, though. That's what I've sort of heard.
Yeah, it has the same kind of setup because Hotel Cafe has the two stages. So it has big
Yeah,
main stage, for
yeah.
bands, and it has that small sided stage which is more singer-songwriter and intimate. And Rockwood now has three stages. I mean, four if you count. There's one called Stage Zero, which doesn't have a stage. It's basically just a tiny little bar where a lot of musicians gather
Oh,
before and after shows
yeah.
to just chat. And but I
Huh.
think I don't know exactly when it was, but I know I first went there as a tourist. So it was either 2006 or 2009 that I just stumbled in there and absolutely loved it. And it was just the stage two, which is the main stage, and stage one. Back then, I think it might not even had stage two. Who knows? But it has been around for a while. I'm so glad it made it through COVID because
Yeah.
for me, it's such a nostalgic part of New York, and I met so many great people, and that was kind of my primary community, creatively
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think, as you're describing it, I did think that Rockwood was like if Hotel Cafe is the Rockwood of the West, I thought that Rockwood was the Club Passim of New York. That's sort of how I thought of it. Club Passim is in the Boston area. But now as you're describing it with the different stages, I wonder if it's more akin to what the Middle East used to be like up in the Boston area. Did you ever get up there? Did you ever
I
know about
did.
that club?
Yeah, I played a show in the window at Middle East.
Yeah,
Um,
it was the middle. It was called the Bakery, I think. That
correct.
window stage that they
Yeah.
had, and then they had the upstairs, and then they had the downstairs club.
Yeah, we played, I think, sometime midweek. It was, I don't think there was music happening on all stages because it was in the
Yeah,
middle of the week. But
yeah,
no, it obviously is really busy on the weekends. But yeah, I'm trying to even struggle. I don't remember which band I played that with in New York, but I know we ran up there to play that, and
yeah.
I love Boston as well. I love the kind of
Love it.
that feeling in that town, and a lot of Boston grads come to New York for music, so a lot of Berkeley
Yeah,
kids kind of wind up in New York in the scene, either in the jazz scene or in the
yeah,
singer-songwriter scene. So pretty
yeah.
familiar with just the giftedness, but also the kind of the work ethic that comes out of Berkeley. I feel like they're just
Hmm.
a lot of them work really, really hard, and I really admire that. I've been a
Yeah,
musician for 2 decades, and you have your ups and downs. Like as you quit for a while, and there's plenty of times where I kind of wanted to quit as
yeah,
well, and try to rethink priorities. But um, what I admire the most is when people just persist, because I kind of feel like an artistic or a creative life is in itself a creation. You're kind of doing something really bold to say, I'm going to live by my values. I'm going to live probably a lot of times sort of anti-capitalist,
mm,
and live in a different way that kind of really means I'm kind of awake to myself and to the things
yeah,
around me. And yeah, definitely a lot of Berkeley kids kind of come with that hungriness and that edge to make a life of this, even if it means, kind of that they're not going to be playing Madison Square Garden, but sort of grinding it out as, kind of people in a local scene and doing great work.
yeah. Well, Claire Means, my guest last week, she and I were talking about that idea of being a middle class musician.
Yep.
Just like a working artist, someone who is, all of that middle ground that's between being a celebrity and living in a cardboard box, in Central Square, or not Central Square. I'm back in Boston. Central Park is what I meant to say. Oh my gosh, the
Yeah,
West
Claire is a
Coast.
delight. She's fantastic. I first encountered her on Ari Herstan's podcast, and she's in the book as well. And man, yeah, one of the things that drew me to America was that working class musician. Like when I came here and as a tourist and just to visit, I realized there were people no one's ever heard of who are doing like 200 dates a year and just kind of grinding it out in a van and going coast to coast and selling, merch and just making a life and a living. And, like I don't, I've never been one of those people who I think has aspired to be a household name or to be famous. I love doing the work that I do. I
Yeah,
want to be able to do that work with ease and
yeah,
with consistency and not to like go and get a real job or have a side hustle, or nothing. There's anything wrong with that. I definitely have had a lot of side hustles. Most of mine have been music related, which is pretty funny. Like, I've been writing in kids' music for a decade now, and I realized that the other day. I'm like, wow, that's strange. That's been a huge source of income for me, is writing songs for for kids' TV, and it's been a real gift. But I'm like, that's sort of funny where some people are like, well, that's not exactly a music career. I'm like, it is though. I do everything from notating music to recording and podcasts, doing all sorts of weird things that kind of stitch together a life, which means I get to live independently and do music and to choose when I travel and tour and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it might not be the bullseye, but it's one of the rings on that, it might not be the center of the bullseye, but it's one of those rings. It's not so far out, working in kids' music. I was talking with my dad last week, because his career is not in music. I was asking him about that Miami condo that collapsed recently. I'm sure you saw it on the news. And my dad he tried to retire, and he just enjoys working more than he enjoyed retirement. So he's back in the field where he's that's his world of assessing properties, commercial properties, residential properties, and for structural integrity and whatever, a whole bunch of stuff that I don't quite understand, but that's his world. And so I was asking him about that, his thoughts on that Miami condo collapse. And first of all, his thoughts were, very insightful, of course, because that's his expertise. That's what he works in. That's what he has been doing his whole life. He went to college to be an architect, and now he's entered his 70s. And so he's literally his whole working life been working in that field, half a century. And there was a small blip of time when he stepped away from that world and was working in something completely unrelated. And I asked him about that during this conversation. Why did, that's an anomaly in your career life. Why did you step aside and do this other thing? And he said that he was just really burned out, and he needed to get as far away from that original industry as he could for a little while. But even so, he was still paying attention. He was still reading the articles, reading the magazines, paying attention to what was happening in the world of architecture and engineering. And then he wanted to return at some point, and he has, very successfully. And as I was listening to him describe that kind of career shape, and just having gone to college for it and been working in it, and then taking the step away and then returning to it and doing it his whole life and preferring it to retirement, I later on in the conversation I said, yeah, Dad, it's pretty much the same thing for me. It's just, this is music, and there's a difference in the way that the world looks at that kind of career, and there's a difference in pay scale, perhaps, but it was when I said that to him, I felt like he was able to see my own career through a new lens in a way that he had not before. So anyway, I liked what you were just saying. It kind of made me think of my dad's conversation. But I'm curious. So you left Australia. You're from Sydney.
Yep.
You lived your whole life there until you left, and then you came to the U.S. Is that right? It was just from Sydney to New York and then to San Diego?
That's right. Yeah, I lived in Sydney my entire life, into my early 30s, and only moved a handful of times, honestly. I moved out of home a little bit before I got married for the first time, and then in my marriage there in Sydney, I think we only lived in 2 apartments, and then moved to New York. So lived in New York for 7 years. I'm coming up on 10 years in America, which blows my mind. I was the very last person in my friendship group to travel, and a lot of my friends have since confessed to me that they thought I would be the last person who would have moved overseas and stayed.
Why?
So yeah.
Why would you be the last person that they would expect to do that? Do you understand why they would think that?
I think so. I think for the very, first kind of 30 years of my life, I was one of the people that sort of stayed behind. There's a story in the New Testament, a very famous story of the prodigal son, that gets told a lot around in Christian circles. And I think I was the kid who stayed behind. I was the kid who kind of, you know, my parents were pretty big in kind of church. My grandfather was pretty big in church. And so I kind of inherited this ethic of just sort of building community was the thing that was the most important thing, and being faithful to the church. And I inherited, even though I diverged from them in a lot of ways, and diverged from the very conservative kind of place that I kind of grew up in, I still, because it was on this path of church leadership and kind of making that the center of life, and this faith kind of community being the very most important thing in my life. And so I was the guy who I ran the youth group, and I was there kind of running music and all the things, and I started organizations. And so I was the guy, I think, who just like kept things going and felt this need that if somehow I didn't do it, then it wouldn't, go. And I think that was a big part of actually kind of why I moved to America, and why I think my ex-wife was very like adamant to get me out of that kind of system. Was I just was giving my entire life and myself and my time to it, and hadn't really thought about what I wanted to do necessarily. I guess I had thought about it, but in Australia, it's not a very big place. There's only 22 million-ish kind of people in Australia, and most of them live on the east coast of Australia within 3 major cities. So there's not much you can do as a musician in terms of like touring the way you can here, where there's just a town everywhere across the states, and you can get in a car and drive and play and play and play. It's just not the opportunities there. So even a lot of very successful musicians have side hustles in Australia, and this is very much this idea of go and get a real job is a very Australian kind of thing. So yeah, I think I was just the dependable, responsible one, for 30 years. And then I think, the first time I visited New York, I just absolutely loved it and fell in love with it, and said, I'll live here one day. And, several years later, we made that a reality, and moved our entire life. And we only knew 2 people in all of New York, and moved ourselves over there and started again.
Was that, so when you and I were talking behind, in the green room before the show, I used the word fissure or fracture when because I was thinking about that, the idea of moving from Australia across this vast ocean. I know that we have airplanes, but I do think that our psyche is aware of the distance. When I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast here in the U.S., I think that my psyche does know that there's 3,000 miles between the two, even though I could hop on an airplane and get back in a few. There's something, it feels far. And so when I think about you moving from Australia to the US, it feels like a great fissure. And then also I know that, from your background in the church to where you are now, there's a great fissure. I think that's the right word there, right?
Oh, yeah.
Were those two things, it sounds like what you're saying right now is that they were related. When did you leave the church? How does that relate to your leaving Australia?
Yeah, they're very related, absolutely. I grew up in this very small Christian denomination called the Christadelphians, that's not mainstream Christian at all, and very proud, very staunchly, stoically, kind of like we alone have the truth. There's only about 60,000 of them worldwide, and I gave all of my life and attention, like I said, to that community. And in that community, it's all voluntary. So there's no paid ministry. There's no paid staff or teachers or spiritual guides. And so I was kind of working as an after-school music teacher. Was kind of my job, and trying to gig around and as an indie musician, which I don't think I ever really made like a cent off music as an indie musician in Australia. It was more like spending the money I was making teaching on kind of music videos and recordings, and hardly making any of that back. But every other kind of waking moment was spent, consumed by trying to create new musical expressions for this faith community, and by pushing back against my conservative upbringing. So the first time I probably left kind of the really conservative part at 20, and then I spent the next 10 years in Australia in a more liberal side of that particular church. But then it wasn't until I moved to the States where I completely got out of that system and kind of started stretching I'd already kind of been reading a lot and kind of listening to podcasts. And this was the early 2000s, and so there was a lot of really big mainstream Christian, so who were sort of getting kind of some big fame across podcasts, and I was listening to a lot of those. So moved to America and found myself wandering through a lot of faith traditions there in New York. It's a very diverse place, as you know.
It is, yeah.
And so kind of you only had to turn one block, north of me in Brooklyn to kind of find yourself in a pretty Orthodox Jewish community. And it was a really fascinating place to live because you got so many cultures and religions and faiths like rubbing up against each other on a daily basis. And I found that exhilarating, but also exhausting as well, as I was trying to kind of come to grips with what did I believe? Who was I? What was my sense of identity and belonging has been a huge part of my journey. And I think faith is, to that point, I think I recently said to a friend, I feel like I've spent my entire life running at breakneck speed after my idea of what God was. That I would just had this desperation that somehow if I found like the truth or the answer to some of these things, that I would find peace. And what I found instead was a lot of heartbreak and a lot of burnout and a lot of pain and a lot of grief. And when I sort of came up for air a few years ago, when my marriage fell apart and the community of faith that I was a part of there kind of let me go, and my life in New York came to an abrupt halt, I had enough of myself and enough of my journey to understand that I do believe that the universe is abundant and for me and not against me, and the divine loves us unconditionally. I knew a lot of that theoretically. What I think I was struggling with personally was I felt like I was the exception to that somehow. that even though I believed that God loved everyone, the divine was for us all, that somehow I was uniquely out of that algorithm, and I didn't know who I was, And so that's been the journey that I've been on the last couple of years, is discovering and leaning into, with therapy and with friends and community, leaning into who I am and trying to heal my wounds, rather than spending my entire life, I think, through church, which was all outward facing, is trying to heal the world's wounds, or this big grand mission, to help other people, and realizing I wasn't helping anyone in the very broken state that I was in, with my super insecurities and all of my baggage and all of the false belonging I'd kind of gripped onto to try and salve those wounds.
Yeah, wow, thank you for sharing all that. I think that there's I sense it in myself, and I imagine that maybe this is a universal feeling, or almost universal feeling, where we want to hold on to something, and so it's a very odd, uncomfortable feeling to be completely untethered.
Yes.
And so sometimes we will cling on to something, anything, it doesn't matter, even if it's dragging us down, even if it's a false narrative, even if it's the wrong person or the wrong substance or anything, because that feeling of being untethered, it feels like there's some kind of, like, we'll be sucked into a black hole, like it's just a great abyss. And I wonder if ultimately that is what faith is about having the trust, the faith that we can let go of the things that we are clinging on to, trusting that we will not just get sucked into a black hole and disappear into the abyss, but that that necessary letting go, maybe that's what it's about.
I love that. It feels so simplistic, and I think at the same time it's so true. I think, as humans, we're just meaning-making machines, right? We're walking around the world just trying to find some form of, like, what does this mean? Like, what does life mean? What is, what does it mean?
We're wired for story. We're trying to find the story. Yeah.
Yeah, like one of the stories.
And so a lot of times we'll put the wrong things together just for the sake of having a cohesive narrative, right? But it's not the right narrative.
Yeah, this week I was watching something, and it was reminding me that it was about space, and it was kind of reminding me that as humans, at some point in our evolution, we thought that the whole of the solar system, the whole universe, revolved around the Earth. And so the central narrative was that we're the center of the universe and it's all revolving around us.
Yeah.
And we've put that through in all sorts of kind of faith narratives as well, that
Yeah.
that this one unique creation is somehow like how the divine is healing the whole story. Now that we know that we're not at all, we're sort of on the outskirts of our own solar system, the galaxy is spinning around, and we're one of hundreds of billions of stars. So it's intriguing to me, just kind of like what is faith? Like how do we actually see that? What is the really simple kind of definition of that? And I think a lot of it has to do with what you just said, where I feel like faith is how we're making sense of our fears, how making sense of what happens after this, the ultimate kind of feeling of, usefulness of, are we spending our time here well, or are we going to do something better later, or how does all that stuff kind of work? And I think a lot of it also has to do with that fear then leads us to questions of control, and I think sometimes faith can be used, I think, as we've seen, the last few years with the narrative in America that that we're holding on to trying to find a savior, and Trump is some sort of savior that's going to somehow solve us from all these problems. So yeah, I think faith is an interesting thing that we try and do as humans to make sense of the big questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I still want to, I find my mind still wanting to work on that a little bit, because I think that a lot of religions are based on the idea of, you used the word earlier, truth, and the truth in the particular church that you were in, and all of these different churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, everything. This is all of those versions that say this is the truth, we hold the truth. There are a lot out there that don't say that don't insist that they are the only truth holders, but there are many that say, yes, we are the only truth holders, and you must follow this path, you must subscribe to this idea in order to be tethered to the truth. And that idea of like that truth and trust and faith, they're really tricky. Those are really tricky concepts. They're not simple. I don't think they're simple. Or maybe they are simple, but they're hard to... there's a friend of mine, he was on this show way back at the beginning, Kevin Fisher. He's a marvelous songwriter. And he has a song called... I think the song is called it might just be called Simple, but the line is, it's so simple it's profound. And frequently it's true. It's like the thing that is simple is the thing that's profound, because it's so hard to get to that simplicity, but when you do, it's like that truth. And I think that if there really is one single truth, that one single truth should want us to let go and become untethered, because we will come back to it if it is really true. Yep. Rather than wanting to shackle us to it the way that so many religions threaten in some way. You can't let go, you'll be lost if you let go. Well, they should maybe want us to let go so that we could come back and I don't know, just working through ideas here.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, the community I grew up in explicitly called themselves the truth, capital T truth. And when people left the community, we would often talk about those people have left the truth. So it was very much, it was very emphasized that we alone had this thing. There was very much, there was a verse that they used from the Bible that was, few will be saved, many are chosen, but few will be saved. So it was this very this very scarce idea of truth, this very scarce idea that the universe, at the end of the day, was only on a few people's side. The Jewish people were one of those, the chosen people of God. So that was kind of the Christian community I grew up in, really kind of believed that. And I think obviously a lot of Christians here in the States also, sort of subscribe to that kind of theory. Because we're kind of, the Old Testament is the Jewish scriptures that we kind of read, which is fascinating,
There was a time when I was a waitress. I was like probably the only vegetarian to ever serve wait tables at the Outback Steakhouse, but nevertheless I did. And you know, when I would go up to the tables, this was in my 20s, when I go up to the tables, I can't remember if I had a name tag or if I just had to introduce myself, you know, hi, I'm Arielle. And I was living in this area of Pennsylvania that is known for the Amish and Mennonite communities. And I would, the Amish wouldn't come into our restaurant, but very frequently Mennonite or other, you know, pretty conservative Christian people would come in. And I would introduce myself and they would say, what kind of name is that? And I would have to explain, oh, my family is Jewish. And it happened so often that, you know, they would either just look at me or they would grab a hold of me and say, you are the chosen people, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating, that whole relationship between Christianity and Judaism, and the tensions that are actually there, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, definitely the church I grew up in was very, very Old Testament heavy. You know, as a kid, I probably could have told you, you know, a bunch of the history of all the Jewish festivals and why they were there and the meaning of them and the sacrifices. And, you know, that was the stuff that was sort of drilled into us as kids. And I feel like there definitely was kind of a, sort of this desire to live in this very orthodox way. You know, we were very separate from the world. As kids, you know, I wasn't allowed to go on school camp or go to any like other school parties or mingle, you know, with people. It's almost like we treated them as Gentiles. There was us, and then there was the outsiders. It was a really interesting kind of thing. But I think, you know, to go back to kind of like your riff on truth and what it means, and then the control thing, because I think control is an illusion, you know, but it's something that we cling onto to think that we somehow can make sense of this existence and make sense of this whole like life thing, and feeling that somehow if we actually manage to solve control, that we kind of solve that sort of existential ache that I think exists inside of all of us. And I think recently, and with a lot of my work that I've been kind of going through and researching, I've gained huge empathy for people who struggle with addiction, because I kind of feel like that is one of the sort of an outward manifestation of all of our inward anxiety, you know. And some of us manage to like temper, you know, some of those things and don't make them as like publicly accessible to people. But I think we're all clinging to something, whether it be, you know, control or codependence, or relationships or community or something. We're all clinging to something that we do believe will ultimately save us from you know, horrible feelings, from the threat of death or what happens afterwards, or punishment or rejection, betrayal. But none of those things are inside of our control. You know, none of those things are things that we can actually influence at all. You know, these things will happen to us. Life is just an ever ongoing, changing and evolving thing. And it's curious to me, because I kind of feel like we forget the very basics of life. Is that part of the gift of life is that one day we will also die. That's a reality.
Yeah.
You know.
Do you know that Jason Isbell song? He has a song called "When We Were Vampires."
If We Were Vampires, it is one of my favorite songs. I adore it.
And I feel like it really captures what you're saying. You know, if we lived forever, then we wouldn't embrace this particular moment. But the fact that this moment is fleeting and we don't live forever, then we can appreciate it. You know, and you know, I that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. With as you know, as the world is opening up. You know, we're not post-COVID, but in this new phase, whatever you want to call it. You know, I want us to remember, you know, I don't know, I think that we just assumed that we would always have access to all of the things that we had access to prior to COVID, and then suddenly we didn't, and we felt the pain of the loss, and now that things are opening up again, I hope we can remember that they are not permanent. You know, Hotel Cafe, Rockwood. I love that Jimmy said that he's glad Rockwood survived. You know, going back to that idea, like, you know, the arts and the people. You know, just people in general. You know, we're not immortal. We are organic, ever-changing, mortal creatures living on an organic, ever-changing planet. Everything's changing. You know, can we appreciate what we have?
It's interesting, you know. I had friends who really have read deeply into mystical movements that are all about the present moment. And I I've struggled with that. I think that's, as I've kind of walked through therapy and walked through, you know, this, the book I'm currently reading is on CPTSD, and I shared that with you before we got started. And so this idea of complex or childhood PTSD, where this, in your early years, the way you existed, with the threat of abandonment or neglect or abuse, that just shaped your whole kind of sense of self or lack of self, as many survivors of CPTSD kind of find themselves sort of adrift from a sense of identity and have panic attacks and dissociation and emotional flashbacks. That as I've kind of got onto that journey, understanding that I lost my thread there. I was trying to. What did you just say just before then that I?
Oh
I was
gosh.
kind of thinking about?
Oh, the temporal nature of everything, of life, of
Yeah,
planet.
that's right. And I was talking about how friends got into thank you, that we got into the kind of moving around present moment. And I've always found it very difficult, I think, to get into the present moment, because I think a lot of meditation practices and really good mindfulness practices have been divorced from trauma-informed stuff. So when you're told to sit quietly with your thoughts, well, my thoughts aren't very good, and haven't been for a very long time. So when I'm alone with those things, that is often a traumatic space. And so it's only just recently that I've found a few tools to actually kind of find some peace in those moments.
Yeah.
But most of us, I think, live with either one of two ways. We're either always looking back at the past, so we're always kind of stuck in the best days of my life were in high school, or the best days were we kind of would look back with rose-colored glasses and kind of really, talk about the good old days. Or we're kind of leaning towards this future and thinking all the time, either the good things that are going to come or the bad things that are going to come. And very few of us, I think, exist in the present, which comes back to your point about the gift of this moment and the gift of that life is so fleeting. All we have is this current moment.
Yeah.
And to be able to kind of check in with yourself and to be able to exist in gratefulness and to kind of understand kind of what's happening for you in the moment. And I feel like that's been a huge part of my journey for sure, is trying to understand why I've never felt at home, why I've always struggled with gratitude practices. I've always struggled with all these things. Has been because I had this these multiple experiences in childhood that kind of led me to this super scarcity kind of mindset and this idea that I'm not going to find what I need. I'm not going to find love. I'm not going to find community. I'm not going to feel belonging. I'm going to feel like an outsider all the time. So, yeah, it's a lot.
I think that the hardest thing for us to do is to appreciate the fleeting things, but not to try to hold on to them when and that's heartbreak right there. And to me, that's the essence of it. It's like, how can I it's just like this airplane going overhead. See, this is the fleeting moment of the airplane, which I'm grateful that it will be over in a moment. Like, it's that wabi-sabi thing, that like heartbreak, tender, beautiful, bittersweet thing that, I love my sweetheart fiercely, and yet often, look at our life and there's simultaneous heartbreak for me, because I'm like, this is like, I just want to be so grateful for this moment, because I know that I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that we're human beings. And so, I teach yoga. I have a yoga studio, and one of the things that maybe the thing that I love about yoga is the philosophical text that underlies it, and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And in that text, it says, the purpose of life is to learn. Purpose of life is to learn and to try to find delight and joy in the process of it. And that's the hardest thing. It's like, okay, every day I can learn. Can I also enjoy the process even when it's painful? Like, okay, how can I do that? And I want to say also when you said, sit with your thoughts,
Mm.
yeah, I never got that. Like, I can sit with my senses and I can do like a
Mm.
sensory meditation where I just take in what am I smelling? What am I hearing? What kind of light and sparks of pattern can I see behind my eyes? What taste is in my mouth? Can I feel my heartbeat? And I feel like I got all of that not from a yoga practice and not from a spiritual practice of any kind, but really from a creative writing standpoint, from
Yeah,
songwriting.
wow.
How can I write well? How can I write a story, and how can I engage my senses in order to capture something in this story? And then I just found that through that practice of creative writing, that was where I could more successfully enter a meditation practice of some sort. Celia Chavez, so great to see you here. Thank you for being here. Celia and I just played a show together on Friday, and she's magnificent, and just a magnificent musician, but a magnificent human being. So I'm glad we're
Fantastic.
speaking
Let's
your
be
language.
friends.
Oh, you guys will be. We are. We all will be. We all are. Yeah, I feel like this show is a little bit like each week having a conversation with someone. It's like, oh yeah, like I don't know. There's most of the people I haven't met in person when
Yep.
they've been on the show, because the show started during COVID and I had left music for so long that a lot of this show was um, people that I was meeting online through various things. But I love how it's like each week is like a pearl on a necklace, and it's
Mm.
like starting to string together this community that over the last 15 months was otherwise impossible to
That's
have.
beautiful. That's so beautiful. I want to say that I love what you just said about your bodily practice not being informed from, you know, from either a spiritual practice or from yoga. And I echo that. I think I've said to my therapist so many times that the place I feel most at home is in that musical space when you're
Mm,
creating something. And some people, I think, when they kind of, some musicians, when they hear music, they can see colors or all this other
yeah,
thing. For me, that doesn't happen. What happens is the rest of it melts away,
yeah,
but the story that's being kind of told is so tangible,
yeah,
and and that's what I kind of find in the great writers, like when you said Jason Isbell, and he's one of my favorites. Like, I get paid out all of the time here in my home, because when we were doing our Heathen Happy Hour, which is our live stream show we're doing every single week during quarantine, when we were playing the song one night, I set it up and it's like, I think this guy is one of the greatest living songwriters, and I
yeah,
got paid out endlessly for that, and it's just like now an in-joke in our community, and I don't mind, because I do think he is. He's a master of
yeah,
painting a picture with a very few words, and I think
right,
that's art, is when you can conjure something from nothing.
yeah,
Um, and I've had experiences with music where I've been, walking down the middle of like a mall, kind of busy mall in downtown Brooklyn, where there's just hundreds of people everywhere, and it's like just noises and smells and whatever, and then I'll hear a song for the first time come out of H&M, out of the doors, and I'm just like, I just wander in, it's like, what is this song? Like, that's just the power of something that can just like truly transport you and take you somewhere else, and
mm,
speak to the things you really deeply desire or love, or just puts a smile on your face, or reminds you of some time. Like, it's a beautiful gift, and I think I spent most of my life in spiritual communities very divorced from my body. The
yeah,
idea that basically you have to
yes,
do all this stuff in your mind, you think the right things, believe the right things, say the right prayers. It's all from here on
yeah,
up. And not understand that my body's actually having an experience,
yeah,
and that's what I've been doing in therapy. I was, trying to kind of get into my body, because for me, what started happening a few years ago when my life went to absolute crap was that I started having panic attacks, and what I experienced in my panic attacks was this feeling of completely dissociation, where I could almost be outside myself, looking back at myself,
right,
and in an incredibly judgmental way, saying, "Get your crap together, or you're going to die." It was a very awful, awful experience of feeling outside of myself. And so, the only thing, the piece of advice I got to try and manage some of those things was, in those moments, go back to, what can I smell? What can I
yeah,
hear? What can I
yeah,
touch? Like, literally to get back into my body and get back into the experience I'm having in life. And yeah, it's a slow process to remember that
yeah,
we're actually walking around in these bodies, that have all these feelings and all these kind of senses kind of going on. So
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful that you bring that work into your songwriting, and I definitely feel that at times when I'm playing a song that it's like I've stepped inside the story myself, and I can feel it and taste it, and it's in and around me, and it's healing.
I heard a woman, a musician slash sound engineer. She was formerly one of Prince's engineers, and now she's a neuroscientist. And she was having a conversation with a colleague, and she said that when she listens to music, with lyrics, she imagines the story in the song that the songwriter is describing. And her colleague said, "Oh, that's really funny because I don't. What I imagine is my own story when I listen to another song." And so they actually decided to do a study, survey, however many thousands of people to find out what are they thinking about when they are listening to a particular song. And I thought it was so interesting because I also enter the world of the song. I think I also relate it back to my life, but like I don't know, there's sort of like a superimposing, like a transparency on top, like my life and the story of the song kind of superimposed together. I didn't realize that other people don't do that. Like everybody listens to music differently and they have a different experience. I was like, wow, it's such an internal thing that's happening when we all listen to music, and the fact that we collectively as a society can even talk about music and dance together or go to a show together, it's kind of amazing because it's all like it's entering our ears and it's an entirely internal thing. And some people it's completely in their heads, and some people it's in their full bodies. And I have friends who are dancers, and I am not a dancer at all. I think that's one of the reasons I like yoga too, because it's like, oh yeah, here I am on my mat. Like I can do a kind of sequence and kind of choreograph this within, but I'm not a dancer. But I'm fascinated by dancers because they take in the music and the world. Like the way I respond when I hear a song is completely different than the way that they respond when they hear a song. And for them, it's totally this other thing. It's incredible.
I have the same obsession with dancers. One of my first serious girlfriends was a dancer, and I think the way that they, I want to say think about their body, but I don't know if they know what they think. They're actually like thinking as they're moving. Like thinking for them is actually movement. Yeah. I think there's actually a classic story. I can't remember where I exactly first heard the story, but about this one child who was dragged in by her mother in to see a psychiatrist or a doctor because they kind of feel like this person couldn't concentrate in school and was not doing very well and felt very disconnected from everything. And after a few questions, the doctor dragged the mother out of the room. Can I speak to you privately? And the doors to his office had glass. They stepped out into the hallway, and they just sat there silently for a few minutes. And the mother was like, "Do you have a question for me?" He's like, "I just want you to observe your daughter." And they looked through the doors, and they watched the daughter, and the mother, and the doctor says to the mother, "What do you think that your daughter's doing?" And she says, "She's fidgeting." And the doctor says, "She's dancing." Like, your daughter is not ADHD. Your daughter is a dancer, and dancers need to think, need to move to think. And I think that's so beautiful. Like I do my best thinking, I think, when I run, and I listen to podcasts when I run, and I often listen to podcasts that affirm who I am. So I listen to songwriting podcasts, or I listen to things about faith or psychology or trauma or whatever it is. And I think as I'm running, I'm releasing the toxins, and by the end of the run, I don't ever feel like, some people get that runner's high. I don't feel high, but I do feel clearer, and often I at the end of a run, gone live on social media with some thought that I had that connected me to something, or something from the podcast I found inspiring. It's a way, I think moving to me has a way of then kind of, going through that. But I'm not a dancer, so I admire how they move and how they think, and I think it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. Gosh, Ben, there was one other thing. This show is Tomes and Tunes, so we will get to the tomes and we will get to the tunes, but something else that you said about the head, divorced from the body. There's a TED Talk out there with a someone talking about education and education
Robinson.
practice. Ah, okay, so you've seen
One
it.
of my favorites, Dr.
Yeah,
Sir Ken Robinson.
totally.
This is really old now. It's one of the original
It
TED
is,
Talks.
yeah. And he
Yeah.
talks about how, when kids get to school, first they're told to, kind of sit down and stop
Yep.
fidgeting or dancing, as it were. And so all of a sudden it's like, okay, from the lower half of your body is no longer relevant. And
Yep.
then the upper half of your body is no longer relevant. And then we divide the brain, and it's like the one
just
side
math
of the
and
brain.
science.
It just math and science, exactly. I'm so glad that you've seen that. That's awesome. Yeah,
I'm
and
obsessed with that. Yeah.
yeah, and I was 100% that, because I think
Yeah.
that as a young child, or maybe throughout school, I was one of those kids that was fine with that. Like,
Yeah.
I did well in that world, but when I got out of school, or when I started to sort of, I think maybe some of my early adult struggles were really wanting to reclaim the whole rest of it, the artistic, the physical, the spiritual, like not just the thinking intellectual side, but the wholeness of it.
Yeah. And that the body and your body is spiritual. You know?
Yes.
That things like sex, which is this profound intimate experience, one of the most things that we can enjoy, that provides connection, and even beyond the physical act of sex, the fact that we know now hormones have things to do with our connection with friends and family.
Right, yeah.
And so in our body are chemicals that are binding us to each other and to the planet and to nature around us, and kind of that in our very physiology that we know we're made up of the same stuff as all of the other things in creation. We're made up of stars that exploded millions of years ago, and the same elements exist there. And I think that should bring us back to the oneness of all things, and bring us back to learning empathy for our fellow humans on the planet and all of the other creatures that live here, and the very ground that we walk on, and walk on it lightly and with reverence.
Yeah. Gosh, Ben, there's so many beautiful things about this conversation. Thank you. So great. I need to ask you what you're reading.
Well, I'm currently reading this book on CPTSD, but I'm not going to read from that. I'm going to read from this book called Belonging by Toka Paterno. I read this for the first time, I think it was about 2 years ago. I was in a group of guys who would get up really early on Friday morning and meet in a cafe and talk about books.
Oh,
and so I kind of read
almost my kind of people.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have been invited to that group, but
it was wonderful. It was the first time I've been involved with a really intimate
Yeah.
book study that was just it was just a bunch of men too, which was
Yeah.
odd for me. I grew up kind of around women, and sort of feel like I've connected a lot more with women over my life, emotionally and internally. So this is a really healing time. And so he read this book, and this really spoke to me. And the excerpt I'm going to read from is following a lot of the ideas that we currently have been kind of talking about through this conversation. So it tells us one story at the top of the chapter about an author called Andrew Harvey and the brave memoir that they write. But then this is the kind of the right after that story is the recollection. So, for some people there is a single defining moment when an internal vow of smallness was made. For others, this cringing of the spirit comes from a repetitive and insidious rivulet of disapproving glares, mocking jeers, or shaming of their particular flair. Sometimes it is the eclipsing nature of another's personality in whose shadow you lived, but we do learn it. We learn that if we want to fit in, we must split off, shrink down, and make ourselves silent or invisible. We learn to live life with a limited palette of colours considered acceptable for public expression, while the darker, more vivid gradients of human condition are stricken from the conversation. Driven into isolation, our secret grief, hidden failings, shameful desires, and vulnerabilities can survive the whole length of a life in concealment, refugees even from our own view. But by dissociating from the fullness of our being, we become much more susceptible to what the poet John O'Donohue calls the trap of false belonging. Our longing for community and purpose is so powerful that it can drive us into joining established groups, systems of belief, or even employments and relationships that, to our diminished or divided self, give the impression of belonging to something greater. But these places often have their own motives and hidden contracts. They grant us conditional membership, requiring us to cut parts of ourselves off in order to fit in. Rather than committing to the slow accumulation of intimacy that it takes to weave a true life of true belonging, sorry, start that sentence again. Rather than committing to the slow accumulation of intimacy that it takes to weave a life of true belonging, we try to satisfy our longing by living in marginalized places. Marginalizing places, not marginalized places. These groups may offer us membership, but only in exchange for our conformity to their conventions or goals. It may be a career that meets our security or status needs, but requires us to put our creativity and feelings aside. It may be a relationship that keeps us from loneliness, but excludes our anger or depression. Maybe it is a religious or spiritual group that binds us to its lineage, but expects our subservience to a guru or leader. Traditional patriarchal groups have a clearly delineated hierarchy where the whole structure is dependent upon a single leader or entity, and our membership is contingent upon our agreement with its views. We have an innate longing to be of service to something larger than ourselves. Sadly, that devotional quality is often exploited by these kinds of organizations. For instance, the military uses our longing for kin and purpose to recruit for war. It is often much later that one realizes the group doesn't actually want their uniqueness, but their conformity, so they can manipulate it for its own goals. But everyone is born with a set of sacred agreements to a higher authority than those of this world. Like a pole star, there is a divine self which directs and shapes our lives into what we're meant to become. Sooner or later, we must navigate by our star's light or risk being lost in the dark night of the soul. Yeah, it's an amazing book. I mean, she's a phenomenal writer. Like, I feel like every chapter is a book in its own right, and is super deep. But I think often when I read this, it really resonated with definitely that idea of false belonging, that we have to kind of feel like we have to sell parts of ourselves off to something, or have to like shut ourselves away in order to be truly acceptable and loved. Has been a huge part of my journey, I think, kind of with established an institutional religion, and then just generally in my relationships, how that kind of has trickled down in all parts of my life.
Yeah.
Hi, Mercy.
I feel like that excerpt just pretty much summarized our conversation in so many ways, so many aspects of it. I find that for myself, one of the hardest things is well, maybe this is the root of that false belonging, is that you truly believe that it's not false.
Yes.
And that's the tricky part, how to, sometimes you have to spend some time in that world until you've gotten to a deep enough understanding of that world that you've kind of dropped down, below the superficial levels. You've dropped down to a deep enough level that at that level you're like, oh yeah, this doesn't match me. Like, this is not a match. People talk about square pegs and round holes, and I get that, and but that's pretty obvious. You can look at that surface and you can try to fit the square peg in the round hole, but sometimes it's not obvious that it's not a good fit until you've already descended or engaged. Sometimes that takes years
absolutely
to get to that part where, because also I think that maybe this hits up against that, what you were saying about our desire to be of service, or just our desire to get along. It's like, we don't want to make things that shouldn't matter overly matter. And so, just because there's a little blip in the fabric, a little something, that doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to belong to. It just means there's a little blip there. But sometimes that little blip is actually a red flag, but we just don't realize it until there's like, until you go far enough and you realize, oh wait, this fabric, it's all wrong. It doesn't work at all. And then you've got to like somehow extricate yourself from that situation.
Yeah, it's really huge. I mean, there's a lot to think about there. I know one of the things you asked me about is moving countries, and I think one of the things I almost kind of said in that is I kind of feel like there was a very deliberate fissure on my behalf with a bunch of things, and I feel like I've been running from things. Now realizing, 10 years on from that experience, that there's a whole lot of things I've been running from my entire life. And so a lot of these things that in the story that I tell myself and the story that I've concocted into my head about how my life goes, when it comes down to finding creative partners or romantic partners or friends, I've actually been valuing and looking at the wrong things. And one of my therapist had to kind of challenge me one day, and when I was telling this story, and they're like, so you keep on telling me these stories about the people you've met and how you have these like people you just meet and you just like this incredible connection with, and then you go all in, and then the whole thing blows up in this kind of really dramatic way a little bit later on. And she said, the more I hear about that, she's like, the more I realize that should be a red flag. That when you feel this super deep connection with somebody, and this, and then you get this really heady, almost romantic, like, honeymoon stage of this relationship, even if it's an artistic or a career relationship.
You're getting a drug high, and that's
you're
she's
getting
saying
a high.
that's a symptom that you should look at rather
That's
than as
right.
an indicator, like, go this way. You should look at that sign and say, hold on, pause. Just sit here for a little while, maybe let the high wear off, and then figure out whether you should move forward. Oh, interesting.
It was astonishing when she said that. I just sat there
Yeah.
like gobsmacked in therapy, being like, I can explain so many of my relationships. I can explain so many parts of my life that have gone through that cycle. And it doesn't matter how much I run or where I run, I'm the person I keep running into with the same issue.
Right. There's
so.
there's a common denominator there. You, right, or whatever, all of us, right? We are each the common denominator in all the experiences of our lives. So if there's like a repeated experience, well, Ben, I'm going to share a little bit of this. This is something I've been reading lately, Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, trying to get the reflection. There we go. Song of Solomon. I've been on a Toni Morrison kick this year, or since last year, I should say. She's just a magnificent writer in so many ways, but one of the things I love about her is the way that she describes character, but by describing character, she goes into the details, and by the details describes a cultural dynamic or some kind of bigger truth. She's not just talking about character. So in this particular moment in the story, there are 3 generations of the grandfather, the father, and the son. They are all named Mason Dead. Their first name is Mason, their last name is Dead, and she talks about how they came to that name. But the grandfather was formerly enslaved in the United States, a black family, and so the grandfather, when he was taking a name, he couldn't read, and so he ended up with this Mason Dead name, and then passed it down to his son, Mason Dead Jr., and then Mason Dead the third, he goes by the nickname Milkman. And the one little thing that I thought was very interesting when I was reading the lineage of the names at the beginning of this book, his name is Milkman Dead, and I don't know if you're familiar with the band The Dead Milkmen.
No.
They came out of Philadelphia, and they had a punk rock song called Punk Rock Girl. It was kind of like a punk pop hit. And so when I read that, I was like, did they get their name from this book? And so I went down a little rabbit hole there, and yes, they did. So I thought that was kind of cool. But anyway, so Milkman has gone back to the area of the country where his father and grandfather had been. And he's getting to know some of the characters of the town, and those characters remember the grandfather, Mason Dead. And they're all telling Milkman stories about his grandfather. The more the old men talked, the more he heard about the only farm in the county that grew peaches, real peaches, like they had in Georgia. The feasts they had when hunting was over. The pork kills in the winter, and the back-breaking work of a going farm. The more he missed something in his life. They talked about digging a well, fashioning traps, felling trees, warming orchards with fire when spring weather was bad, breaking young horses, training dogs. And in all was his own father, the second Mason Dead, their contemporary, who was strong as an ox, could ride bareback and barefoot, who, they agreed, outran, outplowed, outshot, outpicked, outrode them all. He could not recognize that stern, greedy, unloving man in the boy they talked about, but he loved the boy they described, and loved the boy's and loved that boy's father, with his hip-roofed barn, his peach trees, and Sunday break of dawn fishing parties in a fish pond that was 2 acres wide. They talked on, using Milkman as the ignition that gunned their memories. The good times, the hard times, things that changed, things that stayed the same. And head and shoulders above all of it was the tall, magnificent Mason dead, whose death, it seemed to him, was the beginning of their own dying, even though they were young boys at the time. Mason dead was the farmer they wanted to be, the clever irrigator, the peach tree grower, the hog slaughterer, the wild turkey roaster, the man who could plow 40 in no time flat and sang like an angel while he did it. He had come out of nowhere, as ignorant as a hammer and broke as a convict, with nothing but free papers, a Bible, and a pretty black-haired wife. And in 1 year he'd leased 10 acres, the next 10 more. 16 years later he had one of the best farms in Montour County, a farm that colored their lives like a paintbrush and spoke to them like a sermon. "You see," the farm said to them, "see what you can do? Never mind you can't tell one letter from another. Never mind you born a slave. Never mind you lose your name. Never mind your daddy dead. Never mind nothing. Here, this here, is what a man can do if he puts his mind to it and his back in it. Stop sniveling," it said. "Stop picking around the edges of the world. Take advantage, and if you can't take advantage, take disadvantage. We live here, on this planet, in this nation, in this country, right here. Nowhere else. We got a home in this rock, don't you see? Nobody starving in my home, nobody crying in my home. And if I got a home, you got one too. Grab it. Grab this land. Take it, hold it, my brothers. Make it, my brothers. Shake it, squeeze it, turn it, twist it, beat it, kick it, kiss it, whip it, stomp it, dig it, plow it, seed it, reap it, rent it, buy it, sell it, own it, build it, multiply it, and pass it on." Can you hear me? Pass it on. But they shot the top of his head off and ate his fine Georgia peaches. This is the grandfather Mason dead. They shot the top of his head off and ate his fine Georgia peaches. And even as boys, these men began to die, and were dying still. Looking at Milkman in those nighttime talks, they yearned for something, some word from him that would rekindle the dream and stop the death. They were dying. So, that's that.
Wow. Now it makes me want to read some Toni Morrison.
Oh my gosh, you gotta read Beloved. Beloved is just, I mean, Song of Solomon and is Beloved for me was it took me a long time to get my fingers into Beloved. The first paragraph bewildered me, and I read it many times over years. I couldn't figure it out, and then finally. In 2020, while I was sitting at home, I was like, you know what? This is the time. let me trust that I can get through this. I know how to read. Let me trust that I can figure out this first paragraph and continue on, and I will figure out how to dig into this book. And it was so gorgeous. Yeah.
I love that. I love that sometimes things that can be difficult at first to really kind of get into.
Yeah.
Once you kind of push through some of that kind of work, the amazing stuff that's on the other side. And, I think that's, I don't know how many times the album has been declared dead in the last 20 years, but I still think it's the most beautiful thing, a full work, when someone, delivers to you a whole season or a whole kind of thing that, a whole package together that they've put together, and oftentimes you have to get past the first couple of songs or the first couple of singles because obviously things get cut out, and
that's a great point.
This is the most mass appealing. I'm just like, this is my least favorite song on the record. Sometimes by the end of falling in love with an album, the first song is often my least favorite.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's like track 11. It's like tucked in the very back. Like
Yes.
thinking about Taylor Swift's 1989, that very last song called "Clean," which has.
I can't believe that we just took a turn into Taylor Swift, but okay, go on. I'm here with you.
This is who I am: deep thoughts and Taylor Swift. I am both of these things.
I just wasn't seeing that turn. Okay, but go on. We can do this. I'm with you.
Well, the last track on that 1989, after you've heard it, it's called "Clean." It's such a beautiful song, and it's. I'm blanking right now on the artist. It's a UK artist who's always doing incredible things with electronica. Will often perform with places where she can actually walk forward in the stage, and it walks into reverb, and she can, manipulate kind of the song with these like gloves and stuff that she kind of performs with. Her name is right here, and it drives me crazy. It'll come to me. Anyway, it was co-written and co-produced with this incredible artist. And I remember when I got to the end of that record and got to that song, I'm like, this is where Taylor's going next. I was so excited. I'm like, this is true, deep, soulful songwriter kind of stuff. And I was so pumped about it. And then I didn't really like the record after that. That was like a weird Katy Perry record where she was like, warring with the world reputation. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I'm just not really into it. But then, last year she delivered to us Folklore, which I think is just stunning.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah, I think there's often songs, even hidden deep on pop records that just say these incredible things.
Yeah. Well, pop records, I mean, Taylor Swift, there's just access to great songwriters and great songwriting, when you're working at that level. So, speaking of songs, this has been such an awesome conversation, and I have sinned. I must confess that I have sinned because I try to keep the show to an hour, but the conversation was just so awesome that I was like, I want to keep going and talking, but we gotta hear some music. Awesome. I'm gonna mute myself. So.
All right. This is a brand new song that I just got done. So I haven't played this anywhere yet. I think it definitely kind of relates a lot to the conversation we've had. So I feel like this is the place I kind of want to play it. So it might have a few stumbles because I've only just kind of finished it. So it's called "I Wish." I wish I could. Oh, there it is, right there. We gotta read these lyrics. All right. I wish you would love me like I wanna be loved, not with words and flowery stuff, but the heat of 1,000 suns at high noon, prisoner aching to be released soon. The passion that comes with the folly of youth, oh, I wish you would. I wish you could heal all my great gaping wounds. Come storm my tower and be with me soon. 'Cause I'm lying on the floor here bleeding out, believing that love is a madman's shout. And I think you know what the pain's all about. Ooh, 'cause I wish you could. I wish I could summon the will to be calm. I wish I could rest like a child in your arms, not rage like a bull when I'm seeing red, fall into a pit of despair now bed. Oh, can I take back all the things that I've said? Ooh, 'cause I wish I could. 'Cause all of my madness and all of my pain, all of my darkness and all of my shame try to scold you and control you. All of my doubts, desperations, domain, all of the demons that circle the drain try to scare you, and they dare you. So I wish I could love me the way that you do, with patience and presence and nothing to prove. Not with the drama of old silver screens or paperback Pulp Fiction magazines. A love that endures all the stormiest seas. Oh, and I wish I could. Yes, I wish I could. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my
Thank
gosh.
you.
I am so happy to just have encountered your music. It makes me just thank you. Hits my heart.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, that might be the most vulnerable song I've ever written. So there it goes. Imogen Heap, Celia, you got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Imogen.
Let's see here. You know, we're gonna have to meet halfway somewhere. Share some shows up here, down there, and
Absolutely.
all that stuff.
I would love that. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah. I want to say also that you've been, you know, I launched my Patreon about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, and you and I had a little conversation behind the scenes about your Patreon, because you just did this like Patreon Palooza.
8-hour
Right.
live stream. The
And you're
craziest
just like,
thing I think I've ever done.
it would look. I mean, how many artists did you have be a part of that?
I had at least 3 artists an hour, I think. So I had one that would were on for about half an hour, and then one for about 15 minutes. Some of those were conversations with friends and patrons and stuff. But
How
yeah, it
long?
was a
Wait, how
lot.
long did the whole thing last?
8 hours. A
Wow.
continuous live stream.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
Yeah, and it was a hot day. It was crazy. I mean, I really enjoyed it because I think, you know, like, haven't had the opportunity, like, conversations one-on-one like this totally are my love language. They soothe my soul. They help me to make sense of things, and so it was so lovely to see a whole bunch of, you know, friends' faces. And then obviously, like you, there are a lot of people on there that I don't know very well at all, or people I just
Yeah.
support on Patreon. And people, I was amazed who said yes. Honestly, it's such a great lineup of people, and so I was honoured to have all those people around, and it was, yeah, an absolute blast. I don't think I love doing it. I will say I don't know if I kind of communicated exactly kind of what it was. I think people were kind of confused about it. But anyway, it's one step in kind of, I think, kind of trying to build that Patreon to the next
I
level.
know.
And,
Yeah. It was awesome. So you're on patreon.com/BenGraceMusic, right?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to play a new song as well. And this one comes, I was thinking about I was thinking about time. And actually, today I was thinking, I was out for a walk, and I was looking at the landscape in front of me. And I was thinking that perhaps this is a theory that is not yet fully examined. So, but I wondered if maybe every story is about time. And when we describe place and anything having to do with place, really that's only because time is so hard to talk about. It's this, we can't hold on to it. Anyway, so this song I was thinking about, I lived for 12th grade, I'm a native Floridian, and in 12th grade we had moved back to Florida. I moved around a lot as a kid, and we moved back to Florida to a town I had never lived in before. I didn't know anybody there, and it was on the east coast of Florida, and a lot of water. Florida is a very, very watery place. And of course there was the ocean, but there was also the rivers. And right downtown in this town that I lived in, there was a river dock that extended out into the, I think it was the St. Lucie River. And this river, the downtown area is very picturesque, and the river and the dock, and it's just one of those places where people go to take pictures of moments in time, like prom night, you know, or weddings, or you know, you bring maybe your grandkids down there and, you know, take pictures with the grandparents and the babies. And I was thinking somehow about this river dock. I don't even know what kind of got into my head about this place, because I haven't been back since I left, and I left after I graduated high school. But it was a very difficult year in writing that 12th grade year, and writing this song about just this beautiful spot there. Kind of, I felt to me like there was a little piece that healed inside me. But as I was writing this song, I was trying to just capture, the setting is the river dock at sunset, but I imagined that that it was someone maybe around, you know, my age now, which the middle years somewhere, you know, no longer a kid, not yet old. And I imagined that, you know, I was standing on that river dock at sunset, and I was looking at the high school kids doing their prom pictures, but also looking at the grandparents and kind of the age of time, you know, passing. So that's this song, River Dock at Sunset. I think that I have a little reverb on right now, maybe. Let's see here. On the river dock at sunset, beneath a crayon box of sky, last moments being supervised, cameras pinned us down like butterflies. We clipped flowers onto dresses, coupled off against the chill, cusp of honeysuckle summer evening, and every word we spoke full of meaning. On the river dock at sunset, the ones who taught us how to stand, reminiscing over rubber-soled shoes, wondering how we got to heels and hairdos. And constellations turn above the river that keeps flowing by. Time on earth keeps slipping by. There's a difference between keeping something safe and helping it to grow. On the river dock at sunset, through the lens of passing years, half between leaving and lingering, we try to learn how to love without worrying. And constellations turn above the river that keeps flowing by. Time on earth keeps slipping by. There's a difference between keeping something safe and helping it to grow. On the river dock at sunset, along the worn and weathered boards, nothing's meant to stay, but still letting go is the hardest drill. And constellations turn above the river that keeps flowing by. Time on earth keeps slipping by. There's a difference between keeping something safe and helping it to grow. Moments like the waves of the watershed, the river dock at sunset. The river dock at sunset.
There's a difference between keeping something safe and helping it to grow. That's awesome. That's a great line. That is huge, and that goes back to that conversation we've been having, is this difference between, nurturing a child and I think for many people it's the goal as well. I remember when I first started to kind of realize and name some parts of my childhood as trauma, I was really reticent to. I was really sort of embarrassed to, because I kind of, like I was saying things to myself like, well, I wasn't like physically abused, and I wasn't this and I wasn't that. And as if somehow like comparing those two things were like, I didn't have it this bad. But when you start to realize like that just this goal of keeping something safe, which I think a lot of people are trying to do, I think, via religious communities, right? We're so concerned about your soul and what's going to happen next, instead of actually kind of, did that community help you to thrive as a human being? Did it help you to become your full self? It's really profound. I love that line a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. There was that 12th grade year when I moved back to Florida, there was a lot of difficulty during that time, and I was doing some like deeper yoga studies, and I had a small group of people that I was in this group with, and maybe there were 5 or 7 of us, and I this one day felt comfortable enough, based on the work that we were doing and the text that we were studying, to talk a little bit about what was happening that year. And this one woman in the group who had been through a lot of physical abuse and really horrid things in her childhood, she slapped me down. She was like, "You got nothing." And I was like, you know what, each of us has our life, and each of us has the things that have created trauma in some way or another, and that we're all trying to heal from. And there's no one-upmanship necessary. Like my pain does not diminish the fact that you've been through pain, nor does it in any way limit the work that I or you have to do on our own. And
absolutely.
So yeah.
It's not a competition, and no one's winning that
and
competition.
If anything, I mean, if we can just help each other, if we can help each other to heal and to somehow make peace with the wholeness of our lives, whatever shape that looks like for each of us, which is unique, then great. So anyway, Ben,
it's huge.
Thank you so much for joining me. Before you say goodbye, I want to ask, is there anything musically or otherwise that you have to promote that you would like to, give folks the opportunity to find you and see you or hear you or anything?
Yeah, well, we're in the world of gigs in the real world again, which is totally amazing, So myself and my partner Karen have just started a residency at a place called Mermaids and Cowboys every Sunday here in San Diego, in La Jolla, from 4 to 6 p.m. So our little duo is called Story and Tune. So we've just kind of started that, and then we'll be back there. We did our first one this Sunday, and we'll be back there next Sunday and working that out. And eventually we might go to every other week, where we'll do, when she has her child for the weekend, she'll probably actually stay home, and I'll do Ben Grace on the offhand weeks, and maybe bring in like friends as well to come in on those weeks and do that. So that's the main thing we got going on. And
I put your website up here. Is this where people can find the information about that? Okay, great, cool.
Find all those things.
That was
and
my
then
intuition.
We'll be out on tour in September, which I'm super excited about, playing the Wild Goose Festival just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, and then we're going to spend about a week in and around Nashville, play a gig up in Kentucky, probably play a few gigs in Nashville and do some writing and hang out with some great folks there. So yeah, amazing. I can't wait.
Oh my gosh, I love that neck of the woods, and Asheville is beautiful, and I have so many friends in Nashville, and Kentucky is just a beautiful state. Oh, lucky you. That's awesome. Well, thank you. Good. Maybe folks who are in any of those places, they will maybe see you, get a chance to see you play.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ben. I will see you backstage, quote unquote backstage. And I will say hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, listening to us talk, and participating in the chat box and chiming in. It's always a pleasure to see what you have to say about it. And listening to our songs, of course. And I am trying to get better at remembering this. I've only been doing this for, I don't know, 20 years or so. But trying to remember that part of my job as a performing songwriter is to help other people know how to be good music fans. And one of the ways that I think I can be better at this is to remind you to subscribe to Ben on YouTube, Ben Grace Music, on Facebook and Instagram, and find him in all the places. He has his patreon.com/Ben Grace Music. All of my guests here on Tomes and Tunes, we are all on all the social media platforms. And seriously, when you like or follow or heart or subscribe or, become a patron, all of those things really help. It's just one by one. And it seems like in this crazy world of billions of people, it seems like a single person doesn't make a difference, but it really does when you're talking about mom and pop shops and independent musicians. Each time you hit subscribe on YouTube really helps. Each, $3 subscription on Patreon really helps. So, just keeping the energy flowing so that we can continue to bring music to the world and stories to the world that inspire and move and heal others. It's I've been talking with some musicians recently, not musicians, but a music community, and I felt it necessary earlier this week to voice this idea, which is that all of the communities that circle around music, those communities don't exist at all without the music. And so it's really important to just hit those subscribe buttons and follow us all on all the platforms. So thank you so much for listening. I hope to see you this Sunday at the Hotel Cafe in Los Angeles. I will be part of the Pearl Jam celebration evening that night. I am playing a couple of songs. One is a Pearl Jam song, and one is actually a Victoria Williams song that Pearl Jam covered. So yeah, I love that song. I'm super excited. And it's going to be a really fun night overall. So first 20 people in the door, I think the first 20 people in the door get a harmonica. And everybody who comes, there's an opportunity for some raffles. You can win a ukulele, all kinds of stuff. And then I will be back at Hotel Cafe with an upright bass player playing as a duo with vocal harmonies, Caitlin Hansen. We've been doing this new project together. She's been playing with me. And so I will be playing that night, August 7th. It's a Saturday. I will be playing at Hotel Cafe, and Caitlin will be accompanying me. And that night, Abby Posner, Abby and the Myth, she was a guest on Tomes and Tunes a while back, she's going to be playing that same night. So I hope you don your mask and bring some hand sanitizer, but come out and be a community and hear some live music. There's a magic that happens on the stage that is just different than, when we're sitting in our little sheds. So hope to see you soon. Hope you stay safe, stay healthy, take good care. See you next week. Bye-bye.